you were to go to a sushi restaurant or something in Japan, would you be able to eat sashimi or something from a non-certified restaurant?
Yeah, so the question is eating sushi in a basically a non-kosher restaurant. So let's go through a number of possibilities. First of all, you got to be sure. You would have to be sure that the fish is kosher, right? Some of the fish might not be kosher. It doesn't have fins, doesn't have scales. They may have swordfish or whatever, some type of eel. Eel is very common in Japanese sushi. The second thing is that even if you knew for sure that the fish was kosher, but if it was cut with knives that were used to cut the non-kosher fish, there might be some residue or some oil that would go onto the kosher fish or the sushi, and that would be a problem because the knives are not always going to be separated. Number three, if the rice was cooked, again, I'm not a big bucky in sushi, but if the rice was cooked, you have a problem of non-kosher utensils used to cook the rice. So overall, I would say it is not advisable unless you bring your own rice, your own cutting board, and your own knife, and you then ask him to cut the vegetables and the fish.
The reason I ask is because normally these fish at places in Japan are very makpid about the way they use their knives, like what fish, and so they only use a certain knife just to cut fish, for instance.
I understand.
Just for sashimi or something like not no rice, just raw fish.
Okay, so once again, you say does that mean? Let's say they cut eel. Would they cut salmon with the same knife they cut eel, or there's like separate? There's a salmon knife and an eel knife. I mean, it would depend. Even if you're telling me they only use the knife to cut fish, but there are fish that are not kosher. I'm treating things like eel as fish, even though I know biologically it's not fish. So, this is a question that happens all the time. Meaning, I want to eat in a non-kosher restaurant, but the ingredients I'm eating are kosher. Is there any particular problem? So there would be a problem. Now, the mila of something like sashimi, which is just raw fish, is you don't have a problem of bishalakim. If you remember, I think it was just last week or 2 weeks ago, or the last time we had a Q&A. So we talked about the Isur D'Rabbanan, that there's a lot of types of foods that even if the food is 100% kosher, if it is cooked by a non-Jew, you might not be able to eat it. So in raw fish, you don't have that problem of bishalakim, but that would otherwise be a very major problem in a non-kosher restaurant. So, if you did your own internal investigation of the restaurant, theoretically there may be a possibility that it is all right, but I would very, very much not recommend that practice simply because there are too many things that can go wrong, and one should be very strict in this. Yeah?
This is a send-in. Why did Hashem create Adam and Chava as adults as opposed to creating them as children and having them have a whole life experience?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Hashem created Adam and Chava as adult people. Why didn't he create them as children? So I think the answer is this. God created the world to be in a perfect state. If you remember the way we understood it, Adam and Chava were given one mitzvah, not to eat from the Eitz Hadas. Had they fulfilled that mitzvah in one day, in other words, they were created on Friday, had they waited until Shabbos, that would have ushered in the Messianic era, so to speak, and that would have been it. They would have earned their reward, and the rest of existence would be the eternity of Olam Haba. Right? That was God's original plan. That was plan A. All of the galus that we go through, all of the struggles that we go through is only because of the chait of the Eitz Hadas, in which that mission wasn't created, or wasn't completed, because the mission was messed up, so we have to go through everything that we go through in our human existence, in our human history, to be able to be misaken. So creating them as children essentially wouldn't have made sense, because God's point was, I want to create people that are mature, that are knowledgeable, that are able to make bechira, able to exercise free will, to do my mitzvah, and thereby create a perfection in this world, making it Olam Haba. If God were to make them children, you'd have kind of 13 years or 12 years or whatever, however you compute it, until that mission could be realized. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the circumstances right away for that mission to be completed. Yeah.
Can you explain what Hashem Tzva-kot means? Like specifically Tzva-kot, I just cannot
Yeah, it is, Tzva-kot, we pronounce it Tzva-kot, but it's spelled with an aleph. It is one of the names of Hashem that we do not say. Now, literally, the word tzava in singular means army, or a host, or a gathering, and Tzva-kot is simply the plural of gathering, and the English translation of Hashem Tzva-kot is the Lord of hosts. And what hosts are what? Hosts means gatherings, multitudes. So it refers essentially to all of the powers of nature. God is the master of all of the animals, all of the plants, all of the forces, all of the nature aspects of it. So the question you're asking is a very good question, because if that's what Tzva-kot means, it's hard to understand why intrinsically that would be called a divine name. In other words, for you to say Hashem is the king of all forces. Now, which part of that phrase is a reference to God? The word king would be a reference to God. All forces is what God is king of. So Hashem Tzva-kot, right? Hashem, the master, the Lord of all forces. So it's a good question. Why should the all forces word be treated as a separate divine name? It is simply the indirect object of the proper noun. The proper noun is Hashem, and Tzva-kot is the indirect object, the Lord of hosts. But apparently, the inner meaning is this, that when we say Hashem is the master of all forces, we don't just mean, he is the master and these are the forces, but we mean the very existence of the forces, second by second by second, is only because it's the will of Hashem. In other words, Hashem, when we say Hashem rules the world, it's not like there's a world and there's God, and God is the ruler of the world, but rather the very life force of the worlds is only the Ratzon Hashem. So consequently, the word Tzva-kot itself becomes an attribute of divinity, as if to say, he is the life force that is mechaye all of those olamos. And that's why Tzva-kot is a Shem Kodesh. Yeah.
Well, part of the bad person, like part of the Rasha, does it matter on their intentions on what they actually do?
I'm sorry, say again, Rasha is what?
What is a Rasha?
What is a Rasha?
Yeah.
Okay, so the problem is the term doesn't always have a single meaning. That's it. The Rambam says a Rasha is simply a person who has more averos than mitzvos, 51:49. But the Rambam says that's not a quantitative measure, because God assigns different levels to different sins and different mitzvahs. One mitzvah may be equal to 1,000,000 averos. One avera may be equal to 1,000,000 mitzvos. So we don't know God's handicapping. We don't know God's cheshbon. But whatever the cheshbon is, if after God applies his calculation, a person has more averos than mitzvos, a person is a Rasha. That's one definition. Another definition of the Balatanya is much more extreme. A person is a Rasha when they've become so enmeshed in their sins that their Yetzer Tov is no longer operating within them. Meaning, even a very bad person is still not necessarily a Rasha if he still has some aspects of goodness that are within him. But when you have kind of destroyed that goodness, that would make you a Rasha. But if you're asking me, is it only dependent on actions? No, because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu evaluates a person, there are many, many different things Hashem looks at. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at actions, Hashem looks at motivations, Hashem looks at intentions, Hashem looks at your real desire. If you have a desire to do good, even if your Yetzer Hara is too strong, you may not fall into the category of Rasha, or the other way around. Even if technically your deeds are good, if your motivations are based on ego and gaiva and power and self-aggrandizement, that might make you a Rasha. So it's a very multifaceted idea. It is not just action or inaction. It's looking at the total person. A Beis Din can only look at behavior, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because a Beis Din cannot read minds, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at a person's heart and looks at a person's feelings, emotions, and the like. But at some point, a person could become a Rasha. But the good thing about being a Rasha is that we do believe in tshuva, except in the very rare cases of God hardening Paro's heart. We read in these parshias. And even then, Paro could have done tshuva even then, but certainly until you reach the point of God taking over your free will, even a Rasha does have free will to do tshuva. And as the Rambam says, if a person was a Rasha all of his life and he did tshuva 1 second before his death, he goes to the Shemayim as a tzaddik gomor. There's a story they tell. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. Unfortunately, I'm told that it's totally false. But I don't know. I have a bad habit. When something's a really nice story, I want to share it with you, even though I know it's false. So please don't write me that it's false. I'm aware that it may be false. So I'm not representing to you that it's a true story. But this is the story that they tell. And even if it's not a true story, I think it shows you something about the nature of the person that I'm going to tell you the story about. So in that deeper sense, even a non-historical story can actually be true. Okay, you can get around it that way. And the story involves Rav Kook. Rav Kook, still the great, great controversial first chief rabbi, not of the state of Israel. There was no state of Israel. He died before then, but of Palestine. And Rav Kook was a great, great Gadol, but we know that to this day, he's a bit controversial because he strived to see the good even in the most secular, even anti-religious Zionists, and he tried to see their greatness and bring them to Torah in different ways. So when Rav Kook was alive, there was another man who became very, very famous, Eliezer ben Yehuda, right? The infamous Ben Yehuda Street that you're not supposed to walk on is named after Eliezer ben Yehuda. His name was Eliezer Perlman. He came from Russia, but he took just Eliezer ben Yehuda. And Eliezer ben Yehuda is famous because he is treated as the father of modern Hebrew. He was kind of a fanatic. I mean, Yiddish was his native language, obviously, but he was convinced he wanted to make Hebrew a modern spoken language. And he put out a big dictionary, actually a very, very interesting dictionary. He invented a lot of words like camera because, there are all sorts of modern terms that, see, today we kind of cheated. When Israel has to invent modern terms for technologies, they just take an English term and make a little applicatia for application. That's kind of cheating. But Eliezer ben Yehuda really wanted to kind of invent Hebrew words that were connected, that would explain the technology, like matzlama for camera, from selim, picture, etc. Okay. So, be it as it may, if that's all Eliezer ben Yehuda did, although that was controversial, that itself was controversial among Charedim, because they said, how can you make Hebrew divrei cho? But okay, that's actually a weak argument, but he was attacked for that. But one has to know, Eliezer ben Yehuda was also an anti-religion, meaning he was a big writer and had a newspaper, and he routinely was attacking, frum people and the like. So he was not a beloved person among the religious segment of Eretz Yisrael. And now, he used to visit Rav Kook every Friday because when Eliezer ben Yehuda was trying to invent words from modern Hebrew, he would often go to midrashim or gemaras to try to see if he could borrow the term and apply it. He wasn't interested in the religious meaning of the medrash of the Gemara, but he was interested in what the words meant, so he might borrow it or apply it. So he used to go to Rav Kook every Friday for an hour or so with all of the questions that he had. By the way, this part of the story is true, by the way. I'll tell you the part that may not be true. So he would go to Rav Kook, and Rav Kook, unlike other Rabbanim, would talk to him and explain to him and go over what the midrashim meant. And Eliezer ben Yehuda used those midrashim in creating new Hebrew words. Okay, Beseder. So one time, Eliezer ben Yehuda came one Erev Shabbos, and they went over their midrashim, and at some point, Rav Kook said to Eliezer ben Yehuda, of course in Ivrit, because Eliezer ben Yehuda would not answer in Yiddish, would not speak in Yiddish. He said, Eliezer, Efshar higia hazman lasot tshuva. Maybe the time has come that you should do tshuva. And Eliezer ben Yehuda answered, Efshar shaharav tzodek. Perhaps the master is correct. Okay. Eliezer ben Yehuda went home. That Shabbos he died. The Levaya was Motzoi Shabbos, because in Yerushalayim they bury right away to this day. Now, if someone dies at night, they'll try to make the Levaya even at night. And like none of the Rabbanim of Yerushalayim would even go to the Levaya because he was considered an apikairos and he was not welcome. But it is said, now this is the part that some say is not true, so I'm not vouching for it, that Rav Kook, who was a Kohen, Rav Kook could not actually go to the Beis HaKvaros, but Rav Kook was maspid him. And Rav Kook said that he feels Eliezer ben Yehuda did tshuva before he died, because if he said, Rav Kook said, Efshar higi hazman lasot tshuva, and Eliezer ben Yehuda said, Efshar sharav sodek, Rav Kook said, I accept that as a statement of tshuva. He died as a Baal tshuva. He is a tzaddik gomer in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now again, some people send me proof Eliezer ben Yehuda was not, Rav Kook did not give a hesped to Eliezer ben Yehuda, etc. Okay, I don't know. I think the story is very consistent with what we know of Rav Kook's nature. And in any event, the larger point is simply what the Rambam says, that even if a person is a Rasha all of his life, he can do tshuva the last second. So that's a long-winded answer to your concern about what is the meaning of a Rasha. I want to make another point, too, from the Chazon Ish. That's very, very important. The Chazon Ish says that all of the very harsh statements that we make in the Gemara about Rishaim may not really apply to non-religious Jews today. That's an important point, because a typical non-religious Jew today is not acting out of rebelliousness, anger, or rejection of God. They are what halacha calls a tinok shenishba. They are like a kidnapped baby, one who never had the education, never had the chinuch, never had the knowledge, never had the understanding. So as a result, the Chazon Ish says, it is not our job to criticize, to castigate, to insult, to denigrate. It is our job to try to be makarev them, and the language of the Chazon Ish is taken from a pasuk in the Navi Hosea, to be makarev them biavosos ahava. That means with ropes or chains of love. So whatever the definition of Rasha is, and it is a multifaceted definition, one should be very careful not to simply apply it to non-religious Jews or conservative or Reform Jews, because many of them would indeed fall under the category of the Tinok Shenishba, and we can decry their ideology and decry their behavior and even be critical of the things they're doing or not doing, although we should always focus on ourselves first. But we would not label them as Rasha, Amalek, Apikoris, or the like. Rather, our stance has to be one of Avas Yisrael and one of being Makarev them, Biavoso Ta'ava. It's a very, this is the Chazon Ish. This is not some modern Orthodox rabbi or Chabad house or whatever it is. I mean, the Chazon Ish is not like some modern person who's always looking for loopholes. The Chazon Ish himself writes this. So, we need to take it very, very seriously in that way. Yeah.
Mesillas Yesharim, it advises that to reach peak spirituality, one should mevatel himself for material comfort, and that attaining a wealthy lifestyle based on is limit forth due to the bulk of time that his work of maintaining such an expensive lifestyle will require from him. However, the Torah does have many agricultural-related mitzvahs that do require Jewish people to own land and considerable property and to be involved in that property in order to fulfill those mitzvahs, even though this could be a spiritual trap for them. So is commercial land ownership really b'diavad?
Yeah, so that's a very, very interesting question. For the people in the audience to hear the question. The question was that the Mesillas Yesharim, which is Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal's great book on classical ethical development of character and how to become an Eved Hashem. Mesillas Yesharim is one of the great handbooks in how to grow in Avodas Hashem, step by step, rung by rung. Talks about the idea of distancing yourself from the material world, not being overly involved in possessions, because that distracts you. You're focusing on making money. You're focusing on the physical needs of life. And by definition, therefore, you're learning less Torah. Your mind is focused elsewhere. And therefore, one should, he espouses the idea of separating from Olam Hazeh. I mean, obviously, none of us can do it 100%, but to whatever degree you can, that is the best way of serving God in order not to be distracted and in order not to be overwhelmed by Yetzer Haras and other types of things. Now, the problem is that the Torah itself seems to endorse a different type of approach, because there are many, many commandments in the Torah that one can only fulfill, let's say, if they have a field. Right? There's mitzvahs of Truma and Meiser and Shemitah, not working the land on the seventh year. Now, if I take the attitude, I'm only going to be in Kollel, I'm not going to be involved in any of these things, then there are going to be major, major parts of the Torah that you're not going to be fulfilling. So don't you therefore come to a conclusion, maybe the opposite of the Ramchal, that I am supposed to kind of be involved in possessions and then do the mitzvahs of Hashem with those possessions in accordance with the mitzvahs of the Torah? Because the alternative actually means that I'm simply not doing a lot of the Torah. Could that be the will of God? In other words, is the Ramchal saying the will of God is that you don't do like 150 mitzvahs of the Torah in order to achieve a higher level of spirituality? That really is a very, very excellent question. Here's the problem. The problem basically is kind of I hate to put it in such a mechanical way, but it's kind of a cost-benefit analysis, meaning to say, ideally, you should be involved in the material world. Ideally, you should own land. Ideally, one should be a farmer. Ideally, one should be connected and do all of these mitzvahs, and do it in such a way that you don't get distracted, that you don't get too overwhelmed with it, that you don't get overly connected to the Gashmias. And that would actually maybe be a higher madrega than simply separating yourself from it. The reality of life often is, however, that even though possessions can be used for the good, far too often they drag us down. And instead of our owning our possessions own us. So the Ramchal, I think, here is being somewhat realistic by saying that for most people, they may need to try, if they're, of course, most people aren't serious about Avodas Hashem, but for most people who are serious about Avodas Hashem, they're better off distancing themselves, because although that does have a cost, there is something they're giving up. You're 100% correct. Your point that they're giving up something is 100% valid, but the Ramchal's point is what they would be giving up by being engaged in the material might be greater than what they're giving up by being disengaged. So in spiritual life, there is often this notion of giving up something for the greater benefit of a person. Now, having said that, the Shita of the Gra was actually very interesting. The Gra told his Talmidim the following. As you know, the Vilna Gaon actually wanted to come to Eretz Yisrael, and he actually left Vilna, but for various mysterious reasons that we've talked about before, maybe we'll talk about again, he never got here. So he went back to Vilna. But his Talmidim, many of his Talmidim, actually did come to Eretz Yisrael, and that's why the foundation of the Ashkenazi Minhagim of Yerushalayim are the Minhagim of the Gra, right? Again, we're inconsistent. We're not purely keeping the Graz Minhagim, but very often, if something is done here that is not the way you're used to in your Young Israel or your Ashkenazi shul in Chutz La'aretz, the standard answer you'll get is, oh, it's the Graz Minhag, like not saying V'shomru b'nei Yisrael Friday night, etc. Minhag Hagra. Well, what does Minhag Hagra have to do with Yerushalayim? I mean, he was in Vilna. The answer is the Talmidei Hagra created the Ashkenazi Kehila. Until then, it was all Sephardic. That's why Rav Ovadia Yosef actually took the position that there is no legitimate right for there to be Ashkenazim at all. He took the position that when Ashkenazim came to Eretz Yisrael, they moved into a community that was overwhelmingly Sephardi, so they were mechuyev to become Sephardim. He says they should, Ashkenazim are totally illegitimate transplants. They were mechuyev to be mevatel themselves. Okay, be it as it may, though, the point I want to make with regard to your question is, he advised all of his Talmidim that they should acquire a little bit of land, let's say, the size of this table. And on that little bit of land, there'll be Makayim, Truma, and Maser, and Leket, Shechicha, and Peah, and Shemitah. So his response was, yeah, have your land so you can do the mitzvahs, but just a little bit, so you're not going to be overly involved. There actually is an organization to this day. I don't remember its name. You can look it up. It's kind of doing the mitzvahs to a shaliach, actually, so I don't know how personally you're connected to it, in which they will sell you a little piece of land in Eretz Yisrael. They'll sell it to you, like, half an acre, and they will, plant it. They will harvest the crops. They will separate Truma and Meiser and observe Shemitah. And that way, through the shaliach, you are fulfilling the mitzvahs by owning a little piece of land in Eretz Yisrael. It's an interesting way for a company to make money, but it actually is something that is on the internet, how you can buy a little piece of land. So in a sense, that's trying to accommodate both the Ramchal's idea and the idea that you're suggesting. But it is a very good question. In some ways, I do want to point out that this may be one of the differences between Hasidus and the non-Hasidus, and that is the non-Hasidic approach to Avodas Hashem was, in an optimal way, was essentially disengagement from the material, kind of kolel, separating, not getting involved. By Hasidim, there was a different Messiah to sanctify the physical, get involved in the physical and sanctify it. And to this day, that difference still exists.
Start with the scenario. Let's say that Reuben and Shimon are sitting together, and Levi walks up, and Levi asks Shimon, "Can I borrow your tefillin?" But then immediately Shimon hands Levi his tefillin before Reuben has a chance to hand them.
I'm sorry, Levi asked Reuven, but Shimon chapped the opportunity and gave his tefillin.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, is that the right thing for Shimon to do because he's having Zerizas to do a mitzvah, or is he, in a sense, stealing Reuben's mitzvah?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. This would fall under the category of what's called chotef mitzvah. The Gemara actually discusses it. That means if somebody is about to do a mitzvah, and right before they do a mitzvah, you kind of come in and grab the mitzvah away from him, that's called grabbing a mitzvah that already belonged to somebody in a sense. So the Gemara actually says that the Chachamim were misakein, that the chotef is the grabber, is chayav a kanas, should actually pay a financial penalty of 10 gold pieces, whatever that was worth, to the guy that he harmed. In other words, that's considered a harm. The same way if I hit you, right, I break your nose, I break your arm, so I got to pay damages. There is a concept that if I take away a mitzvah that you are about to do, I hurt you because I deprived you of a certain opportunity. So you're 100% correct. Even if we don't enforce those fines today, those knossos, we don't enforce when we don't have smicha, we don't have a Sanhedrin, etc. But you're right. If somebody was offered the opportunity to do a mitzvah, it's not right for you to take that opportunity away from them. Now, of course, obviously, if you know that Shimon is going to say no or whatever, then of course you can step in. but or whatever the names, I get names are mixed up. But you should not take it away from him if he was going to do it. Yeah.
Something about Yehuda and Tamar. If the Torah didn't exist and she was not married and there were no witnesses, why should she be burned?
Yeah. So this is a very difficult question. You know, the whole parsha of Yehuda and Tamar. So remember, Tamar was Yehuda's daughter-in-law. She was first married to Ohr, his firstborn, and Ohr did evil in the eyes of God. According to Chazal, he spilled his seed. He didn't want to mar Tamar's beauty with pregnancy, so he spilled his seed. So Ohr died. Then she married Onan, the second son, Onan too, spilled seed. He died, so Ohr and Onan died. So Shelah, I'm just going over the story, Shelah is the third brother. Yehuda did not want her to marry Shelah because he thought she was a dangerous woman. Whoever she marries, the husbands die. So Tamar disguised herself as a prostitute. She had intercourse with Yehuda. When she got pregnant, Yehuda thought she had committed some type of prostitution or adultery. I'll discuss, that's your question. He was going to execute her until she revealed to Yehuda she wasn't going to do it publicly, that you're the guy. And then Yehuda said she is more righteous. So the question would be this. The question would be, Yehuda was going to burn Tamar at the stake. And had she been with another man other than Yehuda, she would have been deservedly burned at the stake. The question exactly is, what was she chayevet misa for? This is before Matan Torah. So it is a real problem. Here is the scenario. First of all, why when Ohr died did Onan step in and marry her? And why when Onan died was it Shelah's turn? Now that sounds like Yibum, right? Yibum is the idea that if somebody dies without children, the brother should marry. But this is before the Torah was given. So there was no mitzvah of Yibum. So what's going on? So the Ramban explains that Yibum is not just a halacha. Yibum is a mystical concept. That a brother can perpetuate the neshama of another brother who died without children. So the Ramban writes that Yibum was practiced among righteous people, even when it was not yet a commandment. We'll call this pre-Matan Torah Yibum. Yibum as a spiritual way of giving nitzchias, of giving eternity to the life of a person who died without children. Now, the Ramban then adds an amazing thing. Even though post-Matan Torah Yibum is only a brother, right? There's no Yibum except for a brother. Pre-Matan Torah spiritual Yibum allowed any relative to do this mitzvah, even a father-in-law. And thus, once it's established she was with Yehuda, that would make it a valid pre-Matan Torah Yibum, even though after the Torah was given, that would have been a Yibum that's totally forbidden, being with the father-in-law. So, what would be the problem if Tamar was with another man? Right? She was going to be burnt because she was with another man. So the short answer would be that, again, there's no complete answer to this. After the Torah was given, when a woman is a Yavama, she is not allowed to be with another man. There's an Isser D'Oraisa called Yavama L'Shuk. If a Yavama has relations or marries another man, that is a lav in the Torah, lo siya eshes hamei sachutza liyasor. So that's why the Yavama either has to have Yibum or the release ceremony of Chalitza. Otherwise, there's Nisi Yavama L'Shuk. Now, the problem is, if you're going to tell me the only thing that Tamar was Averes on is Yavama L'Shuk, and that's the Avera. In other words, Yavama L'Shuk is treated like a form of adultery. But number one, it's not adultery mamish. Yavama l'shuk is not a chiyuv misa. So even if they kept the Isra of Yavama l'shuk, kaidam matan Torah, why would they keep it more severely than after Matan Torah? If after Matan Torah it's not a chiyuv misa, how is it going to become a chiyuv misa before Matan Torah? So the only way to fully understand this is that this is an amalgamation of Noachite law and Torah law operating at the same time. Because we know that before Matan Torah, they had a din of Bnei Noach. Now, if a guy violates one of the 7 commandments of Noach, they're chayav misa. Even stealing, they're chayav misa. Now, Yavama l'shuk is not one of the Sheva mitzvahs Bnei Noach. It is a law that will apply to the Jewish people after Matan Torah that was applied by Bnei Yaakov. But apparently there's an idea that once they took on the dinim of Matan Torah, the punishments for those dinim now have to correspond with the gedorim of Bnei Noach. This is a very shver svara. I'm not saying this is a pashut svara, but because like this, since intrinsically they're Bnei Noach, and when a Ben Noach transgresses what he's chayiv to do, there's a chiyuv misa, then even when they took on things that are later going to be in the Torah, that are not part of Dinei Bnei Noach, but they took them on as Bnei Noach, that's going to create the chiyuv misa. So in short, the chiyuv misa is a pre-Matan Torah Yavamo l'shuk, which became transmuted into their din of a Ben Noach, for which they're going to be chayav misa. Again, this is actually a chiddush. This is not pashut, but this is a particular mahalach. Of course, another thing you could ask is, well, wait a second here. That doesn't work because the capital punishment for the Noachite code is not burning. The capital punishment of the Noachite code is decapitation, herek. So why do you get burning? So Rashi brings another idea of the burning, and that is that Tamar was actually the daughter of Shem, ben Noach, and Shem had a din of a Kohen, and the Torah says when a Bas Kohen commits adultery, the punishment is sreifa. But I'll tell you, this just opens up a can of worms that gets deeper and deeper and deeper. First of all, the sreifa of a Bas Kohen, the sreifa in the Torah, is not being burnt at the stake. It's pouring down molten metal. So the sreifa that they were putting her through has nothing to do with the sreifa of the Torah. Second of all, the sreifa of a Bas Kohen applies to a married Bas Kohen. It does not apply to a Yavamo l'shuk Bas Kohen that's Mizana. And if the chiyuv misa is, as I said, not because of the law of the Torah, but because of the law of Ben Noach, it should have been decapitation. So Rashi itself is very shver to connect it to the, it's Chazal, to connect it to the sreifa of a Bas Kohen. So, in short, there are a lot of unanswered, difficult questions here, but it could, once again, be, as I say, the chiyuv misa generally would be the adoption of Yavama l'shuk, making it part of their Noachide law, which at least would create a chiyuv misa. Right, so that would be one mahalach. Yeah, the back.
Is supposed to be kapara for the sale of Yosef, and how come Shevet Levi didn't have to do any of the hard work, as opposed to even Shevet Yosef that himself had to do the work?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Say the first part of the question again.
Going down to Mitzrayim
Yeah.
was supposed to be a kapara for the sale of Yosef. And how come Shevet Levi didn't have to work and Shevet Yosef did have to?
Oh, okay. An interesting question. The question is, if Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Avdus in Mitzrayim was a kapara, or at least a partial kapara, an atonement for the sin of Mechiras Yosef, we have a certain anomaly here, because Shevet Levi, Levi participated in Mechiras Yosef, and yet they were exempt from the servitude in Mitzrayim. And yet Yosef, Ephraim and Manasseh, whatever, who was the victim, in point of fact, worked as a slave. So how could that be if everything is supposed to be correlated as a kapara for the people who sold Yosef? Then it should be the other way around. Levi should be enslaved, and Shevet Yosef should be the ones that would not be enslaved. So I tell you, I think the Yosef question maybe we could answer a little easier than the first question. The first question is quite difficult. Apparently, Yosef himself is considered to be partially at fault for generating his sale. And therefore, the concept is, Yosef, although Yosef is the victim, of course, but Yosef also needs an atonement for stirring up the jealousy and envy of his brothers by telling him his dreams. So therefore, the idea that Yosef needs kapara is not so far-fetched, even though he was the victim, but he is a little bit responsible for what he did. Now, the other part of the question, I think, is actually is a more difficult question. And that's, okay, so Yosef had some part in his sale, but Levi was mamash involved in the sale, and yet Shevet Levi got an exemption. So the way the Meforshim explain it is, number one, keep in mind that living in Mitzrayim had other deficits besides the actual slavery, meaning one shouldn't look at it as if Levi did not experience the deprivations of Egypt. Levi did. Egypt was a Tamar society, impure society, an immoral society, a decadent society. So Levi certainly suffered as well. So it's not that they didn't, that they fully escaped any of the deprivations. But the reason why they were not enslaved was it was necessary for Klal Yisrael's survival that there be one tribe that would be able to serve Hashem in spite of the environment that they were in, and they were the spiritual inspiration that kept us going. And Levi had that greatest inner strength. Now, where did Levi get that from? We don't know, but Levi had the greatest strength to survive the adversity of Mitzrayim, and therefore they were chosen to be the ones that would be our spiritual leadership. We needed someone not to be degraded as slaves, and Levi was quite literally the best choice for that job. But it's an interesting question. Yeah.
So for women, we know that they're only obligated to daven once a day, but they're also obligated saying 100 brachas a day, right? Right. For men, when we're obligated to daven 3 times, it's very easy to reach 100 brachas, right? But for a woman, if you only daven once, then it's practically impossible to reach the 100. So in a way, is metakaning the 100 on the woman, in a way, indirectly obligating her to also pray 3 times a day?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. But there's a lot of every sentence you said is a machlokas. I need to clarify that a little bit. You started off saying a woman only has to daven once a day. Well, maybe yeah, maybe not. That may be a machlokas rishonim, machlokas the Rambam and the Ramban. According to the Rambam, it may indeed be the case. A woman need only daven once a day, and it not even has to be a Shemona Esrei, just a prayer of her own wording once a day. That's the Rambam. So what you said is correct according to the Rambam. The Ramban, on the other hand, says a woman's chiyuv in davening is the same as a man's chiyuv in davening, and a woman has to daven 2 Shemona Esreis a day. What about Ma'ariv? So that, the Mishnah Berurah says, since even for a man, the davening of Ma'ariv is only a reshut, it's optional. Although it became a minhag, women don't have that minhag, so most women, even women who are very meticulous in davening, do not daven Ma'ariv. Okay, Beseder. So there is a machlokas once a day or twice a day. Rambam would say once a day, and it doesn't even have to be an Amida. And Ramban would say twice a day, full Shemona Esrei. And in terms of how we paskin, the Mishnah Berurah says optimally women should follow the Ramban. But if a woman is raising children or has those responsibilities, so there's a great leniency to be somech on the Rambam's view. And indeed, many, many women in Eastern Europe were not as frum, so I'm saying sarcastic a little bit, as the Beis Yaakov girls of today, and they didn't, in fact, daven a whole Shemona Esrei. Okay, Beseder. Now, your question is, but if a woman does not daven 2 or 3 Shemona Esreis, and Kal V'chomer, if she didn't daven any Shemona Esreis, because she's somech on a prayer in her own words, so how is she going to fulfill the obligation of saying 100 brachos every day, right? We don't want her just to keep on eating chocolate all day. That's going to cause a weight gain, other things, right? So there got to be a better way. So one answer to that is that many poskim say women don't have an obligation of 100 brachos. So it kind of works together, meaning, how does a woman make 100 brachos? All right, there are shittos that say a woman doesn't have to say 100 brachos. It's a chiyuv on a man. But if you do assume a woman is exempt from tefillah, except more than once a day, but she is chayiv in 100 brachos, then you have a very strong point. It's going to be very hard to reach the 100 brachos without de facto having Shemona Esreis. But as I say, there are many shittas that say a woman is pater from 100 brachos. I'll tell you a ma'aseh with the Brisker Rav, a very, very... I'll tell you two stories that happened at different times, but they're both 100 brachos stories. Shabbos is a big problem with 100 brachos, right? Because in a typical day, we daven 3 Shemona Esreis a day. Ma'ariv, because we start counting 100 brachos from the night before. Well, it's machlokas. Do you start counting from the night before, or do you count the Ma'ariv of the same day, even though the day changes? But whatever it is, you count Ma'ariv in the cheshbon of 100 brachos. Is it last night's Ma'ariv or this night's Ma'ariv? Okay, that's a machlokas, but you count Ma'ariv. So Shemona Esrei has 19 brachos. 19. Even though Shemona Esrei, but the 19th bracha, well, Malshinim was added later. So 19 times 3 is what? 57. So 3 Shemona Esreis already give you 57 brachos. More than half of your requirement. And with everything else, it's not so hard to reach 100 brachos. On Shabbos, we daven 4 Shemona Esreis. But the Shemona Esreis of Shabbos only have 7 brachos. So the 4 Shemona Esreis of Shabbos is only 28. So you're missing 19 brachos. You're 19 brachos short. So on Shabbos, you got to make it up with eating or besamim or whatever it would be, right? So that's a problem. Shabbos, there is a difficulty in the 100 brachos. So here are 2 stories about the 100 brachos involving the Brisker Rav. Story number 1, the Brisker Rav used to go to Switzerland a lot because he had asthma, and the air in Switzerland was pure, had less dust, and it was necessary for his health. And he had family in Switzerland. Soloveitchiks were a chashuva family in Switzerland, and there were very, very Haredi community in Switzerland. So he would go often from Eretz Yisrael to Switzerland for health reasons. And the hotel that he stayed, the Baalat Habayis very much wanted to always make special food for him, but he never wanted anything. He never needed anything. So she felt a little bad. She could never give him something special. So one time, he went over to her and he said, "Oh, could you do me a tova? Could you bring me a banana and an apple?" She had no idea why he wanted a banana and an apple, but she was so excited she could bring the Rav something. So she brings him a banana and an apple and for Shalosh Suda Shalishis. And the Brisker Rav says, "Oh, thank you so much, but I don't need it. Thank you." So what's going on? So here is the problem. The Brisker Rav made a cheshbon of his 100 brachos that day, and he only came up with 98. He was missing 2 brachos. So he needed to make up 2 brachos. So an apple and a banana. An apple is ha'etz, and a banana is adama. So that would make up the 100 brachos. But what happened was, she brought him the apple and banana after mincha. And he was called up for Kriyas HaTorah, which he didn't know he would do that. He was given an aliyah by mincha, because he's a Levi, of Kriyas HaTorah. So in aliyah you have 2 brachos. So he made up his 100 brachos with the aliyah that he got by mincha. So that way he didn't have to have the apple and banana. It reminds me of another story. I'll tell you, not about the Brisker Rav, in which a Hesed once asked his Rebbe, he says, what's the difference between you and me, Rebbe? He says, I'm hungry, I make ha'adama and I eat a banana, and you make ha'adama and you eat a banana. So same thing. We both make a bracha before we eat bananas. So the Rebbe says, here's the difference. You're hungry for the banana, but since you can't eat the banana without a bracha, you make the bracha to eat the banana. He says, I'm the other way. I'm hungry for brachos. I'm starving. I got to make a bracha. But never, I can't make a bracha without a banana. So I have the banana to make the bracha. So the question is, do you make the bracha to have the banana? Or do you have the banana to make the bracha? Same thing. The Brisker Rav is saying, I need the banana for the bracha once I have my meya brachos. Now, the second story, though, is halachically a very significant story, very fascinating story. And again, you can't necessarily paskin based on stories, but this is fascinating. It was Rosh Chodesh. Shabbos was Rosh Chodesh. And his son, one of the sons, all of whom became great Talmidei Chachamim, forgot Yala v'Yavai in an Amida, let's say Shachris or Mincha, and had to repeat Mincha. So he went to his father, just said, it's Nebuch, I feel very bad that I skipped Yala v'Yavai in the Shmona Esrei, and I have to repeat Shmona Esrei. So the Brisker Rav said, well, there's a silver lining in the cloud, because at least you got 7 more brachos towards your meya brachos calculation. Now, do you see, this is actually a big chiddush halachically, because I would have thought, if I davened an invalid Shmona Esrei, for which I have to repeat the Shmona Esrei, I don't get credited with 7 brachos on the first Shmona Esrei. That's a 0. The first Shmona Esrei is a 0. It doesn't count. If it doesn't count, I only get the 7 brachos from the second Amida. So I'm not ahead. So the Brisker Rav's chiddush is that even an invalid Amida, for which you're mechuyev to repeat the Shmona Esrei, Lamaisa will give you credit towards your 100 brachos. That's a big chiddush, and Lamaisa, there's a lot of lumdus we could talk about that. But that's an interesting ha'ara in meya brachos, that even the invalid. Now, you might say the Brisker Rav just wanted to make his son feel good. But I'll tell you, I didn't know the Brisker Rav personally, but that wasn't the Brisker Rav's nature. He did not say things just to make his son feel good. The Brisker Rav was uncompromising in emes. So if he said it, it's because he maintained this was the absolute truth. He would not just soft pedal something to make somebody feel good. So if the Maisa is accurate, you never know. I can't say I know the Maisa happened, but if the Maisa is accurate, it's a very big chiddush lahalacha that an invalid Shmona Esrei can still count towards the meya brachos. Yeah.
If that's true, does that mean you can just get away with saying 6 Shmona Esreis and
Well, yeah, but here's the problem. It's a bracha levatala. See, this is the paradox, because if I simply say extra Shmona Esreis, I'm over on bracha levatala, which is kind of amazing. So, brachos levatala count towards meya brachos? I mean, it's almost a stira. It's almost like a mitzvah haba bi'avera. You're getting a mitzvah through an avera. It's a paradox, I agree. But all I can tell you is, you certainly wouldn't be allowed l'chatchila just to say Shmona Esrei over and over and over again because of bracha levatala. Yeah.
At the end of the 6 remembrances,
Yeah.
and all of them are pretty cool, but I don't understand the one about Miriam.
The idea of, we have sheish zechiros. Now, by the way, some have different lists. Some have 10 zechiros, right? The lists are not fully consistent, but the normal Ashkenazi siddur has sheish zechiros. These are 6 places where the Torah says, you must remember this, right? You must remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. You must remember what Amalek did to you, right? Remember how you angered God in the desert, so you'll do tshuva and all of that. So one of the sheish zechiros is, remember what Hashem did to Miriam in the desert, and that is a reference to her becoming a Mitzoras, becoming a Mitzorah, when she spoke Lashon Hara against Moshe. So what is it that I'm supposed to remember? So I think, well, there are two things, and they're slightly different. One is that this is put in my mind the chaimer of Lashon Hara, that even the most righteous, saintly person like Miriam, when she transgressed Lashon Hara, suffered a very humiliating punishment. The other might be more specific for Kavod HaTorah, meaning to say, remember to honor and revere Talmidei Chachamim and Gedolei Torah, because Miriam was nanash because she spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu. So you can debate, is the emphasis the sin of Lashon Hara, or is the emphasis the sin of a denigration of the kavod of a Gadol b'Torah? Remember, of course, you might argue with me, well, wait a second here. She spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu. How do I infer from her speaking against Moshe Rabbeinu that I can't speak against my Rosh Hashiva? My Rosh Hashiva, as great as he might be, is not Moshe Rabbeinu. So the truth is, the Zohar HaKadosh actually says, in every Talmid Chacham, of course that has to be defined as well, but in every true Talmid Chacham, there is a nitzutz, there is a spark of the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu. So when you're paigeya in the kavod of a Talmid Chacham, you are paigeya in the kavod of Moshe Rabbeinu, and therefore think about Miriam, what happened to her when she was pogeya in the kavod of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeah.
Being outside and you're eating something with seeds, if a seed falls out of the trash can onto the ground, what should they do?
I'm sorry, you're talking about Shabbos?
Yeah.
Because of planting, you mean? Because you've indirectly caused it to be planted. Yeah, you're not really mechuyev to do anything, and the reason for that is that since you had no intention to plant, you just threw something away and a seed fell on the ground, so that would be called a dover she'eino mischavin. That's an unintentional malacha, so it's not a sin. So even if it does take root, even if something grows, that's not an aveira for which you bear any responsibility. Of course, if you wanted to be machmir, what you could do, now remember, it's a strange thing, but you can't just pick up the seed and put it back in the garbage because the seed is muktzah, right? So in a sense, you would not be allowed to throw it back in the garbage. But what you can do is you could kick it aside, just kick it out of the place where it would grow, because you're allowed to move muktzah with your feet or in an unusual way. So maybe the best thing to do would be metaltel the muktzah with your body. But as I say, mi'ikar hadin, you don't have to do anything at all because it's an unintentional malacha. Yeah.
What yihirat signs or bakashot are we allowed to make on Shabbos?
I'm sorry, say again?
What yihirat signs and what bakashot are we allowed to make on Shabbos?
Yeah, this is a real difficult question because it's very hard to have a consistent halachic ruling on this, meaning what can you request on Shabbos, right? We have this rule, you're not mevakesh. You don't make personal requests on Shabbos, right? That's a general rule. You don't make personal requests because that can give you anxiety, that can give you sadness, etc. And as a result, takes away your onik Shabbos, so you don't focus on bakashos on Shabbos, right? That's the rule. But then we look in our davening, and we see seemingly a gazillion exceptions. We ask Hashem for all sorts of things on Shabbos. In benching, Uvnei Yerushalayim, rebuild Yerushalayim, restore the Beis HaMikdash. We say Misha Beirachs for Cholim. We say prayers for sick people on Shabbos in Kriyas HaTorah. Yeah, we add at the very end a little bit of a statement. Oh, on Shabbos Imi Lizok. We don't cry on Shabbos. We say the whole Misha Beirach. It's like when people say they want to talk about business on Shabbos, which they're not allowed to, but they'll say, Nitaf Shabbos Geretz. We don't say this on Shabbos, but let me tell you about the deal I'm going to do on, like you're covering it. So you say the whole Misha Beirach L'chola, and you say Shabbos Imi Lizok. So l'chara we are mevakesh. So There is a very, all right, so there are two concepts that are brought out. Concept number one, which doesn't answer everything, is you're allowed to ask for spiritual things on Shabbos. Now that doesn't answer Misha Beres, Rechola. You're allowed to ask Hashem for wisdom, for knowledge, for purity of the heart. V'tayar libeinu liyavdecha b'yemes. Purify my heart. That you're allowed to do. That's concept number one. Concept number two is a little more tricky, and that is anything that is part of the official nusach of the prayer is not nichlal in the Yisr of Shilas Sarachav, meaning it's in the Siddur. It's part of the text of Shemona Esrei, so you can say it. But you don't add your own additional bakashos. There is a concept that when it's part of a fixed nusach, maybe that's a chisaron on our part, it's not going to affect me emotionally to the same degree because it's part of the standard thing. It should affect me, but the Maisa, it's the nusach. So therefore, the Misha Berach L'chayla is an official standard nusach in the Siddur. Uvnei Yerushalayim, the Harachamans, the whole list of Harachamans in benching. Although the Gra did not say the Harachamans on Shabbos for that very reason, but we're noyeg to do it. So there is a concept that if it's part of a nusach kavua, every bakasha is allowed. In fact, Me'ikar Adin, this is why the Yerushalmi has to come up with a new reason for this. Why, the Yerushalmi actually asks, why do we not recite a weekday Shemona Esrei on Shabbos? So the Yerushalmi says the reason is Tircha de Tzibur, Hashem wanted us on Shabbos to have menucha, so they shortened the davening. Now you may ask me, why do I have to come on to a new reason that we want to shorten the davening? Maybe it's pashut that you don't daven the weekday davening, because the weekday davening is full of bakashos. Answer, no. If they wouldn't have taken away the weekday davening, we would be allowed to say the weekday davening on Shabbos, because it's the nusach kavua. You see what I'm saying? In other words, it would have been mutter had it not been for the other svara that Chazal wanted to shorten it for menucha. So you see a klor raya, I think, that when something is a nusach kavua, it is not within the prohibition of Shilas Sarachav. Yeah.
It says also in the art scroll, the Shilas Soin, put the Tamid and the one after, that some communities are not knowing to say that's how Maisa, or maybe you should say them.
Yeah, so it's actually better not to say them, because since that is not an obligatory recitation. Now, there's the Nusach Kavua may only apply to those things that you're mechuyev to say. So even during the week, you're not mechuyev to say the Yehi Ratzon. So any haskara that is an optional She'ilas Sarachav, you don't do on Shabbos.
And so how could we have a Misha Beirach? So I understand if we have a Messiah for something, but...
Well, here's the thing. When you say new Misha Beirach, I mean... the prayer Misha Beirach is a takana kavua for chaylim. The fact that you're adding a new chayla, but the nusach that you're saying is the is
not for a different person, but like for the one for not speaking Lashon Hara, or some people say different Misha Beirachs that a kehillah might say. Or
yeah, I understand. For example, the Taisus Yom Tif was misaken. A Misha Beirach for people who don't talk during davening. Have you ever heard this? A lot of shuls started saying it, but since it prolonged the Misha Beirach, it actually caused more talking. So people didn't know what was being another Misha Beirach. Misha Beirach, people not talking, caused more talking, so they discontinued the Misha Beirachs. I don't know. What I'm thinking is maybe another nakuda, and that is general ideas that may God bless you and take care of you are not really what we're talking about with Shilas Sarachav. Shilas Sarachav has to be maybe a more targeted thing in which you're asking for a specific thing. You know, Hashem, cure this sickness. Hashem, give me a parnasa, give me a job. But when you simply make a statement, may Hashem bless you, For example, we say a Misha Berach for people that are oskim b'tzorchei tzibur b'yamuna. That's maybe not nichlal in Shila Saracha because it's not specific. Remember, the yesod here is that when you're focusing on your particular problems, it gets you depressed, it gets you down. So Chazal didn't want you to get depressed on Shabbos. But I think the brachos in general don't fall into that category. Yeah.
When do you say Bli Neder?
Yeah, when does one need to say a Bli Neder? The answer is most of the time you don't, because it's the other way around. Nothing is a neder unless you make it a neder. So I don't have to negate something with Bli Neder because it's not a neder. But where it's a proper thing to do is when you're undertaking something that would be a mitzvah or a virtuous action. Let's assume you decided you wanted to daven vasikin, right? You want to get up before sunrise, so you're going to make Shmona Esrei with the sun. Now, davening kavasikin is a very, very, I mean, I don't do it, but it is a very chashuv inyan. Ad kidei kach, amazingly enough, if you lived in a place where there was no minyan that davened vasikin, but you wanted to daven vasikin every day, that would even be docha. That would override tefillah b'tzibor and kriyas HaTorah. Although ideally you should, after vasikin, you should go to Hir Kedusha and the like. So let's assume you started doing that. So here we have another principle that when you do a devar mitzvah 3 times, even if you didn't say the word neder, it becomes like a neder. So in such a situation, you have to say, and actually verbally, that when you go and you're davening vasikin, you have to say to yourself, I am undertaking this practice, but it is Bli Neder. Because otherwise you have the rule that doing something 3 times, a mitzvah, makes it a neder. But for things that are not a devar mitzvah and they're not a virtuous practice, you really don't need to say Bli Neder because it's not a neder unless you say it. Yeah.
Is there no halachically permitted way to become a doctor in today's environment, since you can't do so online, and you'd have to spend years at a college that's co-ed with brilliance and full of other issues, maybe even Michal Shabbos? If so, the other issue is we'd only be reliant as a community on doctors who are not from the community.
Yeah. So you're raising the question, is there a halachically permissible way to become a doctor today? The truth is, if you're a Kohen, there actually isn't, more or less. But that's a separate thing because of anatomy and dead bodies and the like. But let's say you're a Yisrael, so being in contact with the dead is not a problem with you. But you have issues of pritzos, you may certainly have issues of Shabbos and the like. But I would say I think it's a davar pashut that no posek today would say it is usher for a non-Kohen to go to medical school because of those halachic issues. The halachic issues have to be addressed, and yeah, it is going to be quite complicated. But there is such a thing as Shomer Shabbos residencies; they can be arranged. There are halachos that have to be studied. You certainly need a posek to be with you every step of the way. But by and large, I don't think we discourage from people from going to medical school. We might, now again, I mean, obviously if you live in a kolel mentality where you discourage from people from any type of higher education, yeah, you're going to have that problem. But putting aside the college and education and everything else, we don't consider medicine as a treif profession. And people who are so talented can be directed that way. Now, there is an issue about a woman who wants to be a doctor. But okay, that would depend on the Rav that you're talking to and the posik that you're talking to. But all I want to say is these issues have been navigated. They have been worked out. There are many, many people that you can talk to if you wanted to go to medical school and the like. So I would not at all say that we would discourage it. Maybe for any given individual, we might say it's not the right choice, but it can certainly be done. And Baruch Hashem, there are many, even great Talmidei Chachamim who happen to be MDs as well. and they're not Bali Tshuva. I mean, okay, Bali Tshuva may have gotten his MD before he was frum, but I'm talking about people who went to medical school as frum people, and they remained religious, and they became very learned in Torah as well. Yeah.
There's a midrash that says one who does chesed to someone with no hakarat tov, it's like they did avodah zarah. So practically speaking, how is one supposed to go about being a bal chesed while a lot of people nowadays are very self-centered?
I'm sorry, I want to understand. You're saying, because I'm not directly familiar with that. One who does chesed and the recipient is not makar tov. It's as if the recipient is an oved avodah zarah. The giver is an oved avodah zarah. In other words, we're castigating the giver because the recipient was not makar tov. What's the svara there? What's the logic there? Why are we blaming the giver? I have to think about that a little bit, because you're right. If you took that very literally, that should actually mean, I guess that's your question, I shouldn't do chesed to somebody who's not going to appreciate it. Okay, I have to hold off on that and think about that a little bit. All I can tell you is that if you look at the Sefer Tomer Devorah, which is the great, great classic in emulating the ways of Hashem, he says over and over and over again, in many, many different ways, exactly the opposite idea. That's why I'm a little thrown off by this. He talks about the idea of emulating Hashem's midah is to give chesed to people, even if they're not appreciating it. So all I can say is that the derech of Musar has always been in the other direction. So I'm going to try to check the medrash and get back to you on it. Yeah.
There's a pretty significant industry now of like frum women coming out with like kosher like movies, basically how they play and happens to be they're even all female characters and actors in the movies. And I just want to hear, I guess, Rabbi's thoughts on it. I guess, like, is that something that we should be encouraging, or is it something that's a healthy expression of feeling Jewish culture?
Yeah. So again, I'm not totally familiar with what you're talking about, rightfully so. But the issue of religious women, Orthodox women, making movies about their lives or about things going on in their kehilos and their religious lives. And you're saying the women are dressed sanua and everything is sneas. There's no kolisha, there's no singing. But they're going through a play, they're going through a story. And the question is, what is the role of, is that a kosher thing for women to do? So first of all, you can ask the question, is it a kosher thing for men to do? Because men do it also. There was a movie out, there was a very popular movie in Israel, Ushpizin, you might have heard of this, which was, made by a religious cast, and it was a whole story, and, it was a frum story, but it was a movie, and the like. There was even a little bit of a sineous romantic aspect to it, again, sanua romantic, and the like. So some people were critical of even men getting involved in popular entertainment, but when it becomes an all-women's thing, maybe it gets one step more controversial. It's very, very tricky. It's hard to know what to say about it. In a perfect Torah world, this would not be the medium of expression because of kol kavuda bas malach panima, the glory of a woman is sneas, and not necessarily to project herself out there in a public way, at least to a mixed group. If it's made only for women, that's a separate thing. If the movie is made only for women to see, that's a separate thing. But if it's made for men and women to see, many would say that itself is a chisaron in sneas, no matter what the dress is. On the other hand, there is always another hand here, and that is, if you have women who are very, very creative and artistic, and if you cut off these avenues of artistic expression, that creates a lot of sadness, a lot of depression, then there may be room in Judaism to allow sineas types of productions in the sense that it prevents a greater harm, meaning it's not the best thing, but it may be better than the alternative of having women run around, be miserable and sad, and Subrachin, which will affect their families and affect their children. So this is something that I think I might get mail on both sides of the equation. How dare I give a hechsher to a movie? How dare I express reservations against legitimate artistic expression? People will feel strongly on both sides. I think that there is a makom to allow it, but it's not the greatest. It really is not the greatest thing. I think it may be a sign of our weakness, but once again, we have to deal with our weakness. If it's something that people genuinely need, one is mechapes within the halacha to find a way that can be done.
I do think they advertise it. I think they do it for, at least for a lot of them, they advertise it for women only.
So for women only is much more mutter. Even then, one might say, what's this women doing public things? Okay, but if it's women only, I think it is much more acceptable. I was being mechadesh that even if it's geared to a mixed, as long as it's no kol isha, there's a makom that one could see this as a legitimate need. Yeah.
I guess part of their story is that they claim that they're trying to combat, women or people going into seeing other,
Well, that's a cheshbon, right? That's a cheshbon. Maybe it's better to have this than the other way. Yeah. This is the lesser of two evils idea, which is a powerful idea. That sometimes you do something that's not 100% great because it prevents something that would be a lot worse. That's kind of the life that we live in. It's not between good and bad. It's between bad and worse. Right? So you got to go with harab and miyute. That's why Rabbi Vajra has shuvas. Is it better for a woman to wear pants or a miniskirt? Right? I mean, both are not good, but you got to choose which is less sanua and the like. Yeah.
How far ahead did you have to plan? For example, if somebody wants to go to work, should he take into account AI taking over certain fields, or someone who wants to go to Kolo, does he have to find a rich shver? What's the?
Well, finding a rich shver is always a good idea. What do they say? This is the halacha I'll never forget because somebody gave me such a great reason for it. In Nusach Ashkenaz, although in the yeshiva world we don't do this, Motzei Shabbos we say two prayers. Vihi Noam, which we always say. I'm sorry, Vihi Noam. And then some people say a longer tefillah, Vayitim L'cha Elokim. It's in the Siddur. We don't say it in the yeshiva world, but so the halacha is that when a Yom Tif is coming in the coming week, we don't say Vihi Noam because you don't have 6 days of malacha, but you still say Vayitim L'cha. So people always forget that. They forget which one don't you say when there's a Yom Tif. So here's what I once heard from a balabas. He says, listen, it's like a shidduch. Vihinaya means let it be beautiful. So beauty, sometimes I'll take it, sometimes I'm not. But yitem l'cha, the shver to give money, that I always have. So that's how you know. Yitem l'cha, you always have to have. Vihinayam is optional. But going back to your question, so I assume you're asking this from the perspective of bitachon, meaning a person has to have bitachon that if I do a reasonable hishtadlus to make a parnasa, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take care of me. So the question is, part of hishtadlus is to reasonably look at the future in terms of where this is likely to take me. So you're asking me how far that's going to go. Do I have to think about AI? Realistically, I think you do, but you also have to know that there's so much that you don't know. Meaning, what are you supposed to do? I mean, AI theoretically can take over everything. In fact, I don't want to give myself an ayin hara, but 5 years from now, maybe there'll be some AI thing sitting here taking over the Q&As. It's quite amazing. Even now, in which it's very underdeveloped, even now, you would be amazed at the answers you can get from AI. Now, again, you have to read it over. I mean, a lot of it. I mean, it's not a panacea. AI is not yet a Rosh Hashiva, that's for sure. And a lot of things that it says are wrong. But surprisingly, there's a pretty high percentage that is workable, usable material that a person can work with. So I think you need to think about this, but don't go crazy. Understand that it's all biyad HaKadosh Baruch Hu. and don't obsess yourself. And in terms of looking for a rich fare, I don't think you should look for a rich fare at all, because that shouldn't drive your shidduch at all. When you're looking for a wife, it's nice if she has a rich parent. I mean, I'll admit that, but that's not what's driving your decision. What's driving your decision are the midos, the personality, the compatibility, the caring. So one should not even factor in money. If money comes in, it's an extra nice bracha, but whatever. So that I wouldn't even think about that much. And AI, I'd be aware of it, but once again, I think you have to put yourself in Hashem's hands. So don't overly obsess over it. Yeah.
Can one delete Hashem's name on a computer?
Can you do what?
Delete Hashem's name?
Yeah. So hey, otherwise you'd be in big trouble. All the poskim say that Hashem's name on computer screen, can be erased, even if it's Yud Kei Vav Kei Mamish, can be erased, can be deleted, can be shut off, because it's not considered to be writing, it's just pixels. Now, it's interesting, this is something that you need to be a little tech savvy with, because I am not. In some of the readers, Kindle, those type of stuff, you do have a problem, because some of them use ink. And you got a real problem. If it's an ink-based screen, ink-based interface, you have a real problem that it may be an issue of erasing and the like. So some of the readers are a problem, but a computer screen itself is not a problem. Now, obviously, once you print off the screen, like anything else, it's a regular printed document, so there would be an issue of throwing it away or erasing or scratching it out or the like. But the Etzem computer screen is mutter, so you're okay. Yeah.
Why is it not mutter to marry, especially to marry multiple wives?
Yeah, so you're asking that under Torah law, for sure, a man is allowed to have more than one wife. That's for sure allowed. Of course, Yaakov Avinu had, and the Torah in Devarim talks about if a man has two wives, firstborn, one he loves, one he doesn't love, whatever it is. So even if the firstborn is from the wife he doesn't love, he must give that firstborn all the privileges. So this is called polygamy, and it's a davar pashut that polygamy is mutar da'oraisa. However, we also know that at least among Ashkenazic Jews, polygamy is no longer permitted. And this is said to date from the time of Rabbeinu Gershom in Germany. Rabbeinu Gershom was considered to be really the first of the Rishonim. Rabbeinu Gershom was the Rebbe of Rashi. Right, the Rebbe of Rashi. And Rabbeinu Gershom was accepted in all Ashkenazic countries. That would be, in those days, Germany, Poland, Russia, and the like. And he had a beis din that was Makubal by Am Yisrael. And he declared a cherem, a ban, an excommunication, on a few things. On a man marrying more than one wife. That's called cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. He also banned his beis din divorcing a woman against her will. The Oraisa, you could give a get to a woman against her will. He banned that. And the third thing that he banned is not related to that, and that's reading somebody else's mail. Reading somebody's private mail is a violation of the Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. Now, originally, the Cherem was only a temporary measure that was supposed to expire in the year 5000. That would be 785 years ago. Rav Yosef Karo brings that the Chachamim renewed it and they extended it permanently. Sfardim, who were not under Rabbeinu Gershom's jurisdiction, were never makabel that cherem, and thus technically Sfardim are allowed to have more than one wife. Ashkenazim are not. Now, the question that you're asking breaks down into two questions. Question number one is why? Why did Rabbeinu Gershom and his beis din, it's not just him, but his beis din, why did they enact a ban on polygamy? If the Torah allows it, why would he ban it? It is not so clear what the reason is. The reason seems to be that as the Doros got spiritually inferior, men became less able, as a general matter, to fully love and take care of their wives if there were multiple wives. Meaning, there was a time in the development of the Jewish people where people were capable of loving all of their wives in the same way that they needed to. This was in Niskatnu, Hadoros, etc. The second question, of course, is, even if he had a good reason, what was his authority? That actually is a good question, meaning, what gives him the right to prohibit something that the Torah permits? Meaning, he may have had the best reason in the world, the Torah permits it. How does he have the koyach? Again, that's a good question too, but B'pashta, things that the Torah permits, the Torah doesn't require polygamy, the Torah permits it. So this is, the Chachamim always make gezeirus. They asher chicken and milk. I mean, this is the general idea of the Chachamim making a fence around the Torah for various reasons. So this would be an example of that. In 1948, when the Israeli chief rabbinate was established, so as you know, there are two chief rabbis to this day. There's the Rav HaRashi of Ashkenazim and the Rav HaRashi of Sfardim. So in 1948, they made a joint agreement, like almost a peace treaty between Ashkenazim and Sfardim, in which Sfardim agreed to follow two Ashkenazi practices that they previously had not followed. Number one, the Sfardim agreed to assume the ban of Rabbeinu Gershom, which until 1948 they had not. And number two, Sfardim agreed to discontinue the practice of Yibum. You know, among Ashkenazim, the Ramah says we don't do Yibum today. If a man dies without children, even if the brother and the widow want to get married, we only do Chalitza, we don't do Yibum. Sfardim practiced Yibum. In 1948, they said we'll do Chalitza too. So at that point in the state of Israel, Ashkenazim and Sfardim are in the same boat. But Rav Ovadia, who became Sephardic chief rabbi in the 1970s, took the position that the Rav HaRashi in 1948, Rav Uziel, didn't have the right to give up Sephardic prerogatives. And therefore he said the 1948 agreement was not valid halachically, and therefore Sephardim are allowed to have polygamy, and Sephardim are allowed to do Yibum. So it's interesting. There was an agreement, and he then said the agreement, in fact, he even raised the issue. Rav Ovadia was very popular, even among non-religious Sephardim, because he actually inspired a lot of ethnic pride. Shas, his party Shas, a lot of non-religious people love Shas. And he said, how come, it's a good question, how come when Ashkenazim and Sephardim make agreements, it's always Sephardim giving up something to become Ashkenazim? Why doesn't it go the other way? It's good, okay. It's an interesting observation. But okay, but I hear you. Yeah, we'll have to stop soon.
What's the difference between Hachnaah and Anavah?
Yeah, these are two terms. Hachnaah, which is subjugation, and Anavah is humility, right? Subjugation is I place myself under something, and Anavah means also humility. So the question is, and these are terms from the Chavos Halavavos, so he has the Shar. So the question is, what are the differences? The truth of the matter is, the pashtus is, one is much more intense, meaning Anavah is the initial idea of not focusing on my ego and recognizing my limitations, recognizing my shortcomings. But a person might be an anaf, but he still has enough of an ego that he's not going to be mavatal himself to a Gadol or a Talmid Chacham or a Rosh Yeshiva, or maybe even to God on some level. So maybe I would say this. The relationship of Anavah to Hachnaah might be the same thing as the relationship of Emunah to Bitachon. Let's ponder that for a moment. We talk about Emunah and we talk about Bitachon. What is the difference in Emunah and Bitachon? So the simplest, I mean, that this is a vast topic in and of itself, but the simplest explanation is, emunah is more of the intellectual understanding that God runs the world. I'm a maimon. I believe that God controls this world. But I haven't yet emotionally internalized it. I'm still afraid of things. I'm still afraid of people. I still think that I have certain powers. So bitachon is when you emotionally internalize the intellectual ideas of emunah. So it actually is the way you approach life. It's the internalization of emunah on an emotional level. So I would say that Anavah and Hachnaah are kind of very much the same idea. Anavah is the intellectual idea of knowing that Hashem is so great, or whatever, or the Talmud Chacham is so much greater than me, and therefore I need to not be too involved in my ego. But I can know that intellectually, but I'm not yet living it in my gut. Hachnaah is when you actually internalize it. So you willingly subjugate yourself to the higher authority, ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it could be a Gadol, it could be whatever the Hachnaah. Whoever you're machniah to, I think it's the internalization. It's the bitachon part of the emunah that Hachnaah is. Last question.
What's the protocol for, like, it's an idea, but if a Gadol Yisrael went senile, so he would start getting like bad slacks, what would he do?
Yeah. Difficult question. Unfortunately, things like dementia, things like senility can happen, even among a Gedolei Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, it's been relatively rare. It's been relatively rare. HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of protects us, but it has not been non-existent, meaning it has existed. Essentially, if you ask me for a protocol, the protocol would basically be that other Gedolim would talk to him, other Gedolim would quietly, b'derech kavod, communicate that perhaps he shouldn't be consulted anymore or his psukim shouldn't be followed. But it has to be done with a tremendous amount of kavod and reverence. The Gemara says beferish that even if a Talmud Chacham has forgotten his learning, you're mechuyev to honor him. And the raya is a beautiful raya, that in the Aron HaKodesh, not only the second luchos that Moshe brought down intact are in the Aron HaKodesh, but even the smashed luchos are in the Aron HaKodesh, because we have to be mechabed a person for all of his Torah, even if he doesn't know it anymore, doesn't properly apply it. So you do have to have kavod, but if you're asking me, do I have to listen to things coming from a person who is very, very impaired? I don't. I have to be realistic. Now, I will tell you, though, that don't automatically dismiss it, because sometimes there may be a bechina of Ruach HaKodesh coming from the mouth of a holy person, even if he doesn't know what's going on. But Hashem may put certain words in his mouth, so don't dismiss it. But on the other hand, don't blindly follow it either. I think you need to talk to other Gedolim and see what they would say. Lahavdil, I'm not comparing it, but this is an issue, this is happened to be a major issue on the United States Supreme Court, where judges are appointed for life and they stay on forever and ever and ever. And there have been a number of cases of senility. William Douglas was a good example, where the guy didn't want to resign. In fact, even after he did resign, he didn't want to resign. He kept on showing up because he didn't remember he resigned or whatever it would be. And the way they handle it in the Supreme Court is the other judges, the same way I suggested, the other judges go to him and say, "You're signing this paper that you're getting off. It's time to get off." And lahavdil, there has to be a similar process for even Gedolei Yisrael. But Baruch Hashem, it's been pretty rare, so we haven't had to deal with it that much. In fact, for Keret, you see that Gedolim, even past 100, are still able to guide us, still able to help us. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed their Torah to protect them, and Memela protect us as well. I'll end with this little story about senility, and sometimes you don't really understand. Rav Schwab, I've said the story more than once, but it's a very nice story. And this is a true story. Rav Schwab was made. It was a true story. Rav Shimon Schwab, when he was like 16 or 17, was zeicha to meet the Chavetz Chaim towards the end of the Chavetz Chaim's life. So the Chavetz Chaim was close to 100. Rav Schwab was around 16. And the Chavetz Chaim asked Rav Schwab, is your father a Kohen? I'm sorry, are you a Kohen? Rav Schwab says, no, I'm not a Kohen. The Chavetz Chaim said, is your father a Kohen? And Rav Schwab said, no, my father's not a Kohen. He says, what about your grandfather? So Rav Schwab said, he really was very, very taken aback. He thought maybe Chas v'Shalom, the Chavetz Chaim is senile. If Rav Schwab is not a Kohen, then his father is not a Kohen. What is he asking? So he was chayshish. The Chavetz Chaim had some type of dementia. But then the Chavetz Chaim went on and said, wow, so I see. You're not a Kohen because your father's not a Kohen. And your father's not a Kohen because your grandfather's not a Kohen. But you know, I'm a Kohen because my father was a Kohen. And my father was a Kohen because my grandfather was a Kohen. You know why? Because thousands of years ago, by the Chet HaEgel, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, Mi Lashem Elai, who will stand up for Hashem? My great-great-great-grandparents who were Leviim, they stood up for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And your great-grandparents didn't stand up for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which means the decisions that your great-great-great-great-grandparents made affect you today. So the Chavetz Chaim says, listen to this. In every generation, Hashem is calling out, who will stand up for the glory of Hashem? And the decision you make today is not just going to affect you. It's going to affect your great-great-grandchildren. So make the right decision. Right? So what Rav Schwab thought was a senility turned out to be a very, very powerful message. So don't jump to conclusions. Okay, thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.